Professor Lowe ormai si è ritirato dall'attività didattica e quindi, come tutti i professionisti seri, lavora molto più di prima. È stato uno di coloro che hanno più sviluppato il Dipartimento di Bangor, che era stato fondato da uno nostro collega che purtroppo non c'è più, Peter Avzim, che ha iniziato questa serie nel 1992 a Guadalajara. E adesso, thank you Fergus.
Grazie.
Do you want to join in the Food Dude countdown?
5,
4,
3, 2, 1.
The Food Dude.
Fruits are super cool. Veg are super cool. Eat them home and school. Be like the food dudes. Oh yeah. Fruit and vegetables. Yum yum. Lots of energy in your tum. Fruit and vegetables. Yum yum. Run, jump, let's have fun. Super cool. Veg are super cool. Eat them home and school. Be like the food dudes. Oh yeah. The food dudes.
Right. More of these later. What I want to talk to you about today, what my mission today is to persuade you that, you know, the contribution, first of all, we've just been hearing about it, the contribution of behavior analysis to dealing with serious issues like autism, other areas as well of mental health, cognitive behavior therapy and such like, has been fantastic and widely recognized. But what is extraordinary to me is that if you look at the rest of the health domain, the health issues, the major health issues that affect us all, these are barely addressed by behavior analysis. And yet the need for behavior analysis to deal with these most urgent issues of our time is great, as I will try to make clear as we proceed. So, having seen those lovely images of those great kids, I now want to talk about the risks of death that we all face and how we perceive risks of death. So if you look at the right-hand side of this figure, these are World Health Organization figures, you'll see that the risk of death by war is very small, though we worry about it an awful lot and talk about it an awful lot. Or even if we move on down to infectious diseases, okay, risk is getting bigger. But now move down to look at physical activity, low consumption of fruit and vegetables, obesity, high cholesterol, blood pressure. These are the big risks. This is why people die. So this is why so many illnesses are. This is where the drivers of so many illnesses lie. If we look at the major so-called non-communicable diseases, the 4 major non-communicable diseases: cancer, cardiovascular, diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes, and chronic respiratory diseases. All of these, there are important drivers, behavioral drivers. What we eat and how active we are have big impact on these 4 main non-communicable diseases. Actually, I'll be arguing that there's a real sense in which these are not non-communicable. We communicate these diseases in other ways, behaviorally. It's only from a medical perspective that they're non-communicable. And then there's the 5th one, the big one, the obesity, which actually drives all of these other 4. Obesity impacts on so many aspects of health. And yet, though obesity is described in great medical detail, health detail, endlessly, people pore over the horrors of obesity and its outcomes, it is a behavioral issue, almost 100% behavioral issue. To deal with obesity, all we have to do is eat differently and be more active. And nothing else. You don't have to do anything else other than that. But these are fundamentally behavioral issues, mainly ignored by behavior analysts till now. So, if we look at interventions that can help deal with obesity, I usually specify 3 criteria. This is when I found your discussion of how you influence commissioners fascinating because there's so many overlaps with what we do. Very, very interesting indeed. So when I talk to commissioners, I say, well, look, if you're going to prevent obesity, and if you want to prevent child obesity, first step, you've got to make contact with children's psychology. I'm going to come back to that because it really is fundamental. Second point I make is that, if you're going to be spending money, and lots of money is spent, certainly across the UK, certainly across Europe, and I'm sure in the US as well, on public health efforts to prevent obesity. But I say, if you are going to do so, shouldn't you look at evidence? Shouldn't interventions be evidence-based? And very often, much of the money is spent without looking at any evidence of effectiveness. And then what kind of evidence? Well, you've really got to change behavior. You've got to change what kids eat and levels of physical activity. Because often what is measured is what kids know about what they should eat, or whether they're gardening or cooking. And these things may have no impact whatever. In fact, usually don't have any impact whatever on eating habits. So the bottom line is what they eat. Now let me come back to the first one, which is making contact with children's psychology, because this is really where the problem lies in contemporary thinking in public health. First of all, there's the traditional approach in public health is to inform children that they will die of cancer or heart disease or whatever later on, so they really ought to change their behavior. And this is actually throughout public health, providing people with information, educational materials, and so on. This is the traditional approach, giving information. And yet there is a mountain of research literature showing that this is completely ineffective. And often some of it is well-meaning. For example, if you tell a child that this particular meal is the healthy option of the day, they will eat less of it. If you tell them it's the meal of their favorite Disney character, they'll probably eat more of it. But that's counterintuitive in terms of how adults approach changing children's behavior. And the other thing that has to be stressed as well is this is actually a rather difficult area to work in. Changing children's eating habits, in fact, changing anybody's eating habits, is a non-trivial task. And you have to look at a whole range of pressures that are on kids today in terms of what drives their choices. Now, I like to illustrate this. If you want one sort of iconic image to grasp the pressures that children are under today in a free market society, which is what we have, I'd like to show it like this. So, for example, at one time in history, actually going way back in history, this used to be a prized object, an apple. Back to Adam and Eve, kids would, we liked eating these and children would eat them. But now, the choices that children face, in addition to objects like this, they also have objects like this. This is beautifully branded. It's full of actually just sugar and fat, basically, getting on for a pound of sugar and fat. And if that weren't enough, hey, there's a Disney princess on top as well. And for younger kids, for boys, by the way, there are cars and such like, and for younger kids, there are Winnie the Pooh toys and such like. So the pressure on kids to eat this kind of food, as opposed to this kind of food, is fantastic. And it's all pervasive. In fact, the home is probably the biggest determinant of obesity. We like to think it's McDonald's and fast food outlets who play their part. Schools, they play their part, but home is the biggest driver. In fact, a lot of the junk brands that children are so fond of are introduced in the home by their very own parents. And a lot of the kids increasingly these days are drip-fed sugary drinks, which is devastating from if you're trying to get them to eat fruit and vegetables. So there are fantastic pressures. So that raises the question then of how do you effect change? How do you change something that is really quite resistant to change because of all the influences upon it? And I'll talk a bit more about those later. Well, this is how I do it. This is how I have begun getting the message across. And I talk about, believe it or not, I talk about dual brain processes. Again, a little bit like Laurie was talking about brain processes in autism. But I talk about dual brain processes. And I talk about, actually, the work of Kahneman and Tversky from cognitive psychology. And I talk about the brain. I'll often illustrate the brain like this, and I'll say, well, look, 20% of the brain, of the adult brain or whatever, is susceptible to explicit conscious processes. So that's the bit that will respond to information. But the other 80%, the bit below the surface, if you like, are driven by unconscious, implicit processes, actually by cues, rewards, emotions, about which we know nothing or know very little. And these are the big drivers of habitual behavior. And yet, all our efforts in public health are directed to the top 20%. And you know, when it comes to children, it's even less than 20%. Because the conscious part of the brain, the explicit processes, take many years to develop. And yet we're still just working with that top little bit with children. It makes no sense. You have to work with the implicit, unconscious processes. Now, this view, as I say, was popularized by Kahneman and Tversky before he died. And they have been fantastically influential, fantastically helpful in getting this view of the human brain across. You know, because if you think about that view, think about your life, think about how you behave, think about the things you don't do that you should do, it's fantastic as an explanatory system to grasp the complexity of human behavior. And Kahneman and Tversky have been incredibly effective at getting the model across. Tversky, lovely quote saying, when somebody asked him about whether he studied artificial intelligence, he said he wasn't interested in artificial intelligence. What he was interested in was natural stupidity, because that governs so much of human behavior in so many areas. And that's a key insight, and that's where we have to work. But you know, that two-process theory wasn't invented by Kahneman and Tversky. My colleague and I have been working all our academic careers on two-process theory, and of course we were borrowing from Skinnerian views of two-process theory, which in turn and their predecessors, Mead, Vygotsky, and right back to William James. But I give these guys credit for bringing it, for communication, for bringing it through to government agencies, and for getting governments to think in these terms. And of course, what that has done is it has spawned Books like Nudge. And we'll be hearing about Nudge in the course of this conference. Hugely influential. You know, in the old days, Skinnerians used to get a tough time for behavior modification. It was you know, controlling and problematic, and we got a lot of bad press. These days, they don't do nasty things like behavior modification. They do things like Nudge, which actually are fundamentally not that different, philosophically no different at all. But it's softer, and it's a better means of communication to the people that we need to communicate with. I'll be saying a bit more about Nudge as we proceed. But again, people like Thaler and Sunstein, who are the authors of Nudge, have been fantastically influential. And our government, Thaler is in and out of Downing Street in London every second week. And there's a behavioral insight team in Downing Street looking at behavioral approaches, a whole array of problems. And Sunstein has served time on the Obama administration, has been influential there. So their influence has been very strong and is still growing. Now, back to public health. One of the extraordinary developments in the UK in the area of public health in recent times has been the way this nudge thinking, behavior change thinking, has permeated the top echelons of public health. So I'm going to give you now a quote from the newly appointed Chief Executive of Public Health England. And it's a very interesting quote. I'm going to read it out. The choices people make are not influenced by telling them what not to do, which is what public health, by the way, mainly does. It mainly tries to stop people doing things and tries to legislate for them not to do things. But choices people make are not influenced by telling them what not to do or by poster campaigns, which again they do. We need to reach them in relevant and meaningful ways that really do influence their choices. This is not something we have succeeded in achieving in health up to now. You know, that's a great admission as well. The admission that they've made pretty well zero progress in changing behavior. But that's the first step to finding a solution. So we need to think hard about the means we adopt to change their choices. And I love the next bit. I really love the next bit. Combining new digital opportunities with the behavioral sciences is where we're likely to find our solution. And Janet, I bet you like that one as well. Because I really think that describes the future for us. The new technologies, the digital technologies that are emerging are fantastic for people who are interested in behavior change and bringing behavior change to the masses. This is what Public Health England want to do. We should be helping them to do it. We should be enabled, because they don't know about behavior change. And that's what we can offer. You know, they have people who are well versed in nudge theory, working with them, but I want to argue very strongly, and the rest of my talk will be trying to demonstrate this, that we have to move beyond nudge. Nudge is fine. Nudge is a good, positive contribution, but we have to go beyond nudge, and we have to really get to real systematic change. We have to change choices, we have to change behavior, and most of all, we have to have systematic and sustained behavior change. If you look at a lot of the nudge literature and nudge phenomena, a lot of work done by academics looking at this tweak or that tweak. Sometimes the effects will be there and, hey, 3 days later, the effect is still there. But in the domain I work in obesity, an effect that lasts for 3 days or 3 weeks doesn't count for anything. These have to be sustained, clinically significant changes in behavior that last well over time. And to do that, you don't need a single nudge, you don't need just a few, you need all you can bring to bear from behavior analysis and nudge theory and everything else in a powerful system that really does bring about significant, sustained behavior change. And that's what I'm going to try to, now going to try to illustrate how we've set about trying to do that. So, who are we? Well, we focus, we're a social enterprise that is focused upon behavior change for children's health and well-being. Physical activity and healthy eating are our main targets. So far, we've worked with about 700,000 children in different countries, mainly the UK and Ireland. We work with Bangor University. All the money that we generate is plowed back into the development and testing of new programs. Now, in terms of the principles that underline our approach, I counted up the various processes, principles recently, and there are about 50 in all. I'm not going to take you through all 50 today, but I'm going to focus on just the three core principles that drive almost everything that we do, that are at the heart of everything that we do. There are the 3 R's. So, for example, we have role modeling. So what other people do has a fantastic influence on what we do, whether we are aware of it or not. And this is very true of children. So setting up effective role modeling is a key move in behavior change in this domain. Technology has failed. Francesco, it's my impact on technology.
I think the batteries.
La regia dovrebbe metterci le pecorelle come nei tempi andati della televisione, quando si interrompeva la trasmissione era ripresa a pochi minuti. Ma la regia non ci passa le pecorelle.
I'll try to remember, just to keep us going, not to lose time. The other 3 R's, one is role modeling. The second key one, very important for this audience, is rewards. In this whole area, this whole area of research around children's healthy eating, rewards has been overlooked until recent times. People didn't think you should reward children. Maybe it was bribing them. There's a reward decrement hypothesis about maybe the effects would go when you took away the rewards and so on. As it happens, a whole lot of research has come through recently to show rewards are essential to bring about large and lasting changes in eating habits. And so now the area has come around to recognizing at last the importance of rewards. Yeah. Can we come back? Okay, don't worry. Thank you. Is it going to go? Is it working? No. Don't worry. And then finally, the third R is something that is peculiar to the healthy eating area, to this particular domain. And that is a phenomenon called repeated tasting. So simply, if you taste the food often enough, though initially you might not like it, in fact, initially you may hate it, if you have to taste it for some particular reason, a number of times, maybe 10 to 15 times, your taste buds are altered. It's a biological phenomenon. You actually learn to like it. So you can learn to like things, you can learn not to like things. There's a very strong learning phenomenon there. And we can key into that because initially we use extrinsic rewards to drive the behavior, but you're aiming to shift the children over to the intrinsic rewards that are in fruit and vegetables themselves, that are in good food. And it's the combination of these three principles that, as I say, that drives much of our program.
Fruit are super cool, veg are super cool. Eat them home at school, be like the food do's. Oh yeah! Fruit and vegetables, yum yum. Special energy, great for fun. Brilliant skin, teeth and hair. Fruit and veg can get you there. Puns are so uncool, they're full about burp and drool. Too much sugar, fat and cake, that is such a big mistake. Those puns must be crazy. Eating junk makes them lazy. Horrible teeth, hair and skin. Dump that junk in the bin. Fruit are super cool, veg are super cool. Eat them home at school, be like the food do's. Oh yeah!
Paolo likes the music. I'm flattered. So this is the primary school program. The clip I showed you right at the beginning was for nursery age kids, and something we've developed over the past year or so. This is a long-standing program, primary school program. Kids see a number of these episodes. The dudes are in battle with General Junk and his junk punks who are out to destroy the health of the children of the world, which is a true story. It's mainly positive, so the dudes are always successful, and they're always rewarded for being successful. They get their powers from eating fruit and vegetables. You get special energy from eating fruit and vegetables. Do you know, all of which has got a deep scientific truth to it. In addition, in this latest series of videos, by the way, they drink giant bottles of sugary drinks. And the effect of that is that it wrinkles their skin, and their teeth fall out, and of course they can't move around because it contributes to their obesity. All of which, by the way, is scientifically true. It's just speeded up for our videos. So in these set of videos, not only have we done Bandura-like, set up all the conditions, the real role modeling conditions positively in the videos, we've also now begun to move into knocking the opposition, the junk food industry, and taking them on very directly. All of which actually gets through to the kids. Both sides get through to the kids very well. We then have a set of rewards. A lot of our rewards, if you notice in that video, by the way, we're getting ready for physical activity. All our guys now, our dudes, have got signature physical activity skills. And so our rewards are often educational, or they promote physical activity, or actually the lunch boxes that the kids take home for their parents to put fruit and veg in are the most popular item that we give it, but fantastic in terms of queuing for parents and bringing parents on board. And then we have repeated tasting. So we structure the presentation of fruit and vegetables over the first 16, 20 days so that they repeatedly get the same set of fruit and vegetables. So they repeatedly taste them and learn to like the taste of those particular fruit and veg, and also get the achievement of succeeding. So here's what a program looks like at the primary school typically. We first of all have this intensive phase where they get the fruit and veg every day. They see an episode of the movies, they taste the fruit, they taste the veg, and initially they just have to taste. Later, they have to eat a whole portion of fruit and veg, and that's consequated by the presentation of one of these rewards. In addition, the parents are involved. A sort of scheme goes home to the parents so the parents can engage and mirror what happens in school to the best of their ability in the home environment. Getting the parents on board is hugely important. Our research has shown that in terms of getting generalization to the home context. And the parents are fantastic supporters of the program, as I'll hopefully make clear later. After this first 16 days, we then move on to what we call the maintenance phase. So you've now, this first 16 days has a fantastically powerful impact on the kids. They're all, maybe 90% of them will all be eating fruit and veg by the end of this first phase. But then the key challenge is to sustain that behavior change for the rest of the year, in year one. So we move into a maintenance phase, and we move to what we've come to call the dining experience, which we've just developed over this past year. And let me tell you a little bit about the dining experience. We had another maintenance program in place, but more than a year or so ago, I visited some schools in the middle of England. And, you see, the first part of our behavior change program works in the classroom. And you motivate the kids to want to eat fruit and veg. And I thought, yeah, we've done our work because we have food standards in schools which allegedly make good fruit and veg available. But when I actually looked at what happened in canteen settings, what you found was that, say, for dessert, on a Monday, you get chocolate cake, or maybe more appropriately called brown stuff, and custard on a Monday. And on a Tuesday, you get brown stuff and custard. And on a Wednesday, again, it would be some other sponge and custard. Every day you got this stodge, sweet and fatty stodge. And maybe there's a basket of ancient fruit over in the corner. Now I thought that's not playing fair in terms of choices and so on and so forth. That's stacking it up against us. Even though we had the kids motivated to eat fruit and veg, this wasn't making it easy for us. And then if you looked at their menu, the menus were appalling in terms of the amount, again, of stodge, salty, fatty foods that were there, and the choices that they were making. In fact, if you looked at the entire dining room, it was an obesogenic environment. And immediately the penny dropped that you need behavior change thinking to completely change what happens in that environment. To change it from an obesogenic environment to one actually that promotes the eating of fruit and vegetables and less sweet and fatty foods. So that's what we've done. We've developed a program where we radically transform what goes on in the dining room. And we've evaluated it as well this past year. So the dining room experience has got 5 key elements. We have branding, we have presentation, how you present foods, we have prompting, role models, of course, and rewards, of course. Now let's see how they pan out. So branding. So if you go into a food dude school, you'll find that all the good stuff is all branded with Food Dude's special energy stickers and danglers and such like. The menus are no longer the dull school menus. They're actually all Food Dudes branded. And the Food Dudes foods are clearly indicated on the menu. Now this menu is interesting. I'm going to come back to this later because some days are special energy days. Food Dudes special energy days. So I'll come back to that. Then how you present food. You'll find this in the Nudge book. Position fruit and veg. It's quite simple, isn't it? Position fruit and veg first for other foods. Actually, it's kind of non-trivial in the sense that in many kitchens, kids can't even reach the veg or the fruit. It's just, it's crazy. So you make them prominent. You make fruit and veg attractive. So you have parrot boats, melon parrot boats. You give them nice, attractive names and you make them attractive. Now here's one that comes out of the literature in this area. If you can get kids to eat their vegetables before they eat the starchy stuff, all the 4 varieties of potatoes that they'll also put on their plate, the former will displace the latter. So just the order in which you get them to eat these foods has a big impact. And this is my favorite one. I originally called it behaviorally assisted restriction, but the restriction is too negative, so it's now behaviorally assisted replacement, or BAR for short. And what this is about is back to that menu again. So what we have said to caterers is, look, you don't have to provide stodge for dessert every day, for example. On some days, you present a variety of fruit, maybe fruit with yogurt, but you don't have to give the stodge. You can leave it out. Now, people like Jamie Oliver and so on in the UK got into big trouble, and in the US got into big trouble for just, saying you will eat this, and for just having restriction. This is why this is this new phenomenon, behaviorally assisted restriction. In the first 16 days, you get the kids ready to want to eat fruit and veg and not to object if suddenly there's just fruit there and not stodge. And in every school that we've worked in using this, we haven't had one complaint. In fact, in some schools, the children, because we've just done it on 2 days, by the way, I should mention that, but just done it on 2 days, where you just have fruit and vegetable-rich dishes on the main course. But in some of the schools, the kids have actually asked for that to happen for all 5 days, which is fantastic because they're pushing it, not us, and it's coming from them. So I want to now go back to that menu, because we must get back to the evidence, mustn't we, about what works and what doesn't work. And on this menu, this is in our first trial of this scheme in Bolton, in England. On 2 of the days, the kids had vegetable-rich dishes, broccoli bake, with a side portion of vegetables, and with a side portion of salad, perhaps. Very vegetable-rich. And they had no stodge available. They just had fruit desserts. So if you look, as we did then, at consumption of fruit and veg on those 2 special energy days, with 2 of the other days in the week, the control days, if you like, which also have the rest of the food dude stuff going for them, what happens? Well, here's vegetable consumption. So if you look at the baseline data, the standard menu days, there's actually, the rest of the food use program works well in the dining room. We get a 65% increase over baseline. But if you look at the bar days, we go up to 176% more vegetables. So just that one move in itself makes a huge difference to the amount of vegetables they consume. Something similar with fruit. And then if you look at sweet and fatty foods, foods high in sugar, salt, and fat, there's a 62% decrease on those days. These are major changes in the kids' intake of both the fruit and veg and decreasing their consumption of sweet and fatty foods. Other things we do are things like prompting. Are you going to have green beans today, or carrots, or both? The option of not having any isn't there. This is guided choice. There's upsell. Why not have a portion of fruit with that, whatever it happens to be? Why don't you try this? Have a taster. Try the food dish of the day is full of special energy. None of this, by the way, will be unfamiliar to people who've worked for McDonald's or many other chains. This is the sort of thing they do. But hey, we should be doing it too, shouldn't we? And then there's role modeling. So we get the teachers to sit with their kids and to model the right behavior. We get the catering staff to be agents of behavior change. If a member of your catering staff, when a child is about to eat some broccoli or whatever, will go, oh, I wouldn't eat that. It has a devastating effect. And we've done research on this, how easy it is to create food aversions. So you get them to be positive role models in the dining room, which has all sorts of benefits. And then there are rewards. So we've begun moving over to electronic rewards, game-based rewards, digital rewards, which has got terrific advantages. It's where the kids are at, but also in terms of reducing the costs of our program and not having to provide physical rewards at all times. So this is a huge area of development for us in areas like active gaming and such like. Okay, so that's what happens in year one. In year two, and actually for the rest of the years of primary school, there's a reduced program. It's mainly around dining room experience, which runs, you change the school forever. You change the school environment forever, and you maintain that culture of healthy eating forever. So that the rest of the scheme is called Food Dudes Forever. Now results, I have very little time to go through results. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to have to jump over. But this is one of the first studies we ever ran. In London, we worked, actually, these were with what we call the poorest eaters, the category of kids who eat least fruit and vegetables. Actually, it amounted to about a third to half of the children in these schools. There were two schools, one a food dude school on the left, control school on the right, about 700 children altogether. Here are the baseline measures of fruit and vegetables in red and green. Very low consumption of fruit and veg for these kids before the food dudes intervention. Percent consumed on the vertical axis. And then you'll see 4 months after the introduction of the food dudes intervention, there's a massive increase for these kids in consumption of fruit and veg. And these kids in particular are ones where where you need to get most change. And actually we get our best results from poorest eaters, which is probably why I'm showing them to you. On the other hand, if you look at the control school, there is no change over that time period. These got the same fruit and vegetables presented to them, and what this shows is that simply providing children with fruit and veg, which our government does in the UK, and actually your government in the US does as well, doesn't actually change behavior. Doesn't change eating habits. You have to go beyond that to get hold of the children's behavior. I'm just going to put that slide up quickly to show that we've done another similar study in Ireland, different food system, no school canteens, a 1-year follow-up, but lasting behavior change. On the left, in terms of the parents' provision of fruit and veg, is twice as much a year on than before the intervention. And then that's mirrored in the eating habits of the children at 1-year follow-up. This is a recent study from about 10 schools in England, showing about 150% increase in fruit and veg at follow-up, and then that same decline in sweet and fatty foods, which is all important in terms of an obesity intervention. The parents report that their kids eat more fruit and veg at home. They report that they eat more fruit and veg. If you look at parental approval of the scheme, our average is about 98% approval. Parents say that schools everywhere should have this program. So the parental approval for it and backing for it is extraordinary. And I think it's because parents battle with these problems so often themselves, and we're coming in with the solution. We take the burden away from them, and we achieve what they would like to achieve but find difficult to do. So the effects are large and long-lasting changes in diet. Effects generalized from school to home. It's inclusive, children of all abilities and backgrounds, and we work with in special schools as well and have fantastic results actually from special schools, some of the most moving case histories certainly. It works on a large scale and internationally. It's gone national in Ireland. It's gone into every primary school in Ireland, and they've been running it there very successfully now for a number of years. And it's sustainable, and I would argue actually is very cost effective in terms of its outcomes. In terms of the current focus, we have a nursery program, so it works, actually if I were government, that's where I would start. I would start in the early years of life. And actually it's the easiest place to work, but that's where these habits are set in train. that lead to premature death from all those other diseases that we saw on the very first slide. But getting the children from 2 to 4 is really where I think people ought to begin, and our program works incredibly well with that age range, and it's not costly either at that age. Primary schools, most of our work has been done in. Special schools, again, we've done an evaluation this year, and we've got excellent results from special schools, kids with autism and other developmental disabilities. One of the most exciting developments for us this year is the application of the same principles to physical activity. So we just started doing a major trial of this. We've put together various components where we work with children in the classroom, children in the playground, and then children, when they move out of school, engage in other community activities. There's a huge amount of resource, again, devoted to getting children to be physically active. But people who use that resource don't know anything about behavior change. So to bring that behavior change thinking into that work in schools and outside of schools is definitely the way to go. And to bring together a physical activity program with a healthy eating program run by the same people is a really effective, cost-effective and coherent way to change the two main drivers of obesity. So that's where we're going with the physical activity program, the Dynamic Dudes program. And then beyond that, we're also working on, at the moment we work through public health agencies in the UK and elsewhere, and through schools. Sometimes it's hard work working with public health, with government agencies. What we also want to do is take our program directly to parents, again via digital platform, because now the technology is there. In fact, we've got an awful lot of the elements in place to take programs directly to parents on digital platforms. Because a lot of these parents are in problem families are difficult to reach, but increasingly they're using digital devices, they're using smartphones and such like. So it's to reach a mass audience, to bring about mass behavior change. That's where one has to be, and that's where we're going to be. Sorry. We also need to work with retail outlets, who are big influences of consumption of fruit and vegetables and other such foods as well. So we need to work with people who are on the side of the angels and don't want their customers to be obese and want to help them to eat healthily and to be active. And the same applies to restaurants and fast food outlets, exactly the same approach. So if we look at that in totality, we call that a whole environment sustainable behavior change. So if you're going to tackle something like obesity, this is the kind of whole environment approach that is required. And you know, that's exactly what public health in the UK, across Europe, in the US, that's exactly what they have to deal with. But they don't have the means to deal with it, because public health doesn't know about behavior change. And that's what we know about, as people here know about. And to conclude, I would say to you that there are fantastic opportunities here in the area of public health. There's kind of almost the entire world's population to be dealt with. The expertise doesn't lie in public health. It needs to be brought into it from the outside by people who know about behavior change. And I think we owe it to our Skinnerian heritage to want to go out there and to tackle these really big problems and to change the world. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fergus. Any questions before the break? I have a question. I have a question for you. Do you have any data about the comparison of the cost for unit, for a sample of children, for curing obesity and to how much it costs to prevent obesity through food use? I know it's a very difficult comparison, but you probably have some data about this.
It's a very relevant question, Paolo. So if you look at some other costs, the one I like most is that if you look at discussions about obesity and how to deal with it, apart from programs like this, the only other intervention that's known to have some success is bariatric surgery. And that's actually promoted strongly by the medical profession in the UK and elsewhere because it has a success rate. But the costs of that, I mean, the costs of surgery will be very, as you can imagine, will be very substantial, but the costs to the individuals who become so grossly, morbidly obese, and the costs of their families, you know.
I mean the social.
But I know. But then, more generally, your question is very pertinent. How do we then quantify and measure from a health economics perspective, health and social economics perspective, what are the benefits of the cost? Because if you look at the cost of running our program, it does cost more than other programs that just give out posters or leaflets, because it's a serious behavior change program that drives behavior change. As you can imagine, it's person intensive. So all the time we're trying to use technology to drive down the costs. But you're right, we have to make the argument for cost effectiveness. And we need to try to get some good health economists to work with to help give us that cost information that we could do it.
One of the most frequent objection against behavioral analysis, both in the field of autism or in such kind of field, is it costs too much, it's for richer people, it's not for everybody, blah, 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 blah. And we say that it doesn't cost more than an effective intervention, economically, financially speaking. And the advantage of, from a personal point of view, are incommensurable, absolutely incommensurable.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fergus. Allora facciamo un piccolo break.